Hello, this is Professor Pronte with your video for Module 8. Our topic today is going to be looking at the role of the federal government in our economy. And rather than looking at stuff from hundreds of years ago, we're moving ahead a little bit in terms of time. So the time period here that we're going to discuss is post-World War II, leading up to the present, right? So we're just leaving off from where we ended with Module 7. And looking at what's happened in our economy since then. Big punchline that you should be aware of here is that the federal government today, in the modern economy, the present day economy, has a bigger role in our lives than it did in the past. Federal government spending today is at higher levels than we've seen historically. A key idea that you should know about when thinking about what government is doing in terms of buying goods and services is to understand this idea of a budget deficit. Each year, our government and any government is going to be collecting money from a variety of sources, primarily from tax revenue, right? So we don't like paying taxes very much. I don't, at least. But that's what the government is going to use to pay for all the stuff that they pay for. Okay? So on the one hand, the government's bringing in money, their tax revenue. On the other hand, they're buying stuff, right? Roads and parks, police, education, all kinds of different stuff at different levels of government we see funded through this public process. To understand a budget deficit, you want to compare the value of these streams of money, right? All the money that the government's collecting in the form of revenue versus all the money that they're spending in the form of government spending. If those things line up exactly, you would say that there's a balanced budget. If the government is collecting more money than they're spending, sort of similar to or comparable to like they're saving money or something. You call that a budget surplus. Those two that I just described, a budget surplus and a balanced budget, however, are relatively rare for us. The much more common observation in the United States is that we have something called a budget deficit, meaning that in each year, in a given year, the government is spending more money than they collect. They do this by borrowing money. So that's what a budget deficit is. It's also important to know that our government runs budget deficits just about every year. This year, last year, next year. It's quite common that you're going to see a budget deficit like this. In fact, there are only a couple of years in sort of recent American history in which we did not have a budget deficit. So really the most common outcome for us is that we're running a budget. Why is that the case? This doesn't seem like this is something that's maybe a good idea, at least to run budget deficits indefinitely. So why do we see budget deficits so commonly? There are a couple of key categories of spending that really drive this outcome for a government. A couple of key things that the government spends most of its budget on, in other words. And so what are they? One is military spending. The pattern that you want to know is that during World War II, the American government spent huge sums of money, so big surges in military spending. As World War II ended, there were big declines in military spending, as you might guess. Since then, though, we've seen a gradual uptick in military spending over the years. The pattern is that we're spending more on national defense over time. That's the overall pattern. There's also been, though, years where we see these little upticks in defense spending going with events that you might expect, right? So, for instance, the Korean War, the Vietnam War. After 9/11, we're seeing increases, there are jumps in military spending. The pattern is that it's going up, and along with that, we see these little spikes in military spending. That's a big part of federal government spending, national defense. The other major category of federal government spending is Social Security. You guys might be familiar with this. Social Security is a program that we use to fund people in retirement. You learned about this in analyzing the New Deal. Government takes out taxes, and then when you retire, you get to draw a pension, so to speak, a stipend. You get a check from the government. Right? The intention is to provide for people in their old age in the event that they're not saving enough for themselves. Right? The potential problem, though, is that we're spending a huge share of our government's revenue, of tax revenue, on this one program. And that's the position we're in right now. Social Security spending has been growing, and growing largely because we've seen demographic changes. People are living longer today than they did in the past. That's a great thing, right? We want people to live as long as they can. That's positive, except it's not such a positive for the health of the Social Security program. Secondly, there's been demographic changes in terms of birth rates, right? So think baby boomers or other periods in history where you see birth rates going up. Well, fast forward to retirement age from those periods of high birth rates, you're going to see lots and lots of retired people relative to working people. And that's what we're seeing right now. More retired people relative to working people. And so these things together put pressure and strain on the Social Security system, and are another reason why we're running these persistent budget